I wasn't searching for the Great Wall. I was studying fortification logic, angles of fire, defensive geometry, elevation dominance. The kind of structural details that don't lie. And then I noticed something strange. The battlements, not facing outward, facing inward. If this wall was built to keep invaders out, why do some of its defensive features appear positioned to defend against the land it supposedly protects? Tonight, we step beyond textbooks, beyond tourist photos, beyond patriotic narratives. We examine a structure stretching over 21,000 kilometers, attributed to emperors of Qin Shi Huang and later reinforced during the Hongwu Emperor era of the Ming Dynasty. But what if the story is incomplete? What if the Great Wall wasn't originally built by the dynasty history credits, but inherited? What if it was not a defensive barrier against outsiders, but a containment line drawn after the fall of something far older? Something we've come to call Tartaria. Chapter 1. The Official Narrative. Modern history tells us construction began under Qin Shi Huang around 220 BCE. Multiple dynasties expanded it. The Ming Dynasty rebuilt major sections in brick and stone. Its purpose? Defend against northern nomadic tribes. This version is clean, logical, linear. But when you examine the wall physically, not politically, inconsistencies appear. Some sections are clearly Ming-era brickwork. Others, older, cruder, or technologically different. The official explanation says, different eras, different construction methods. But structural analysis asks a different question. Why would a continuous defensive barrier show directional inconsistencies in its military design? Chapter 2. The Battlement Anomaly. Look closely at certain preserved segments. Crenellations, the raised sections between gaps, are sometimes positioned toward the interior. Arrow slits, in some areas, angled inward. Defensive parapets, occasionally reinforced on the southern side. The official explanation: topographical adjustments. But fortification engineering follows principles. Defenses face the threat. Elevation maximizes outward projection. Defensive walls are optimized for anticipated assault direction. So why do we see areas where the geometry suggests defense against the interior? If northern tribes were the threat, why is the defensive logic sometimes reversed? Chapter 3. The Cartographic Ghost, Tartary. European maps from the 16th to 18th centuries label vast regions of Asia as Tartary. Not China, not Mongolia. Tartary, a massive territory spanning Siberia, Central Asia, and parts of what is now northern China. Official history claims Tartary was simply a vague European term. But here's the question. If it was merely ignorance, why was it consistently labeled for centuries? Maps are political documents. They define control. So what if Tartary wasn't just a misunderstanding, but a suppressed geopolitical reality? And what if the Great Wall marked its boundary? Chapter 4. A barrier or a border. Modern textbooks call it a defensive wall. But historically, massive walls often serve dual roles. Military defense. Political demarcation. What if the wall wasn't built to keep invaders out, but to mark the edge of an empire that no longer exists? After a civilizational collapse, whether by war, catastrophe, or what alternative historians call the mud flood, surviving regimes wouldn't need to redraw territorial lines, control population movement, rewrite origin stories. A pre-existing megastructure would be convenient. Claim it, attribute it to your dynasty, integrate it into your mythology. Over time, it becomes yours. Chapter 5. Construction Impossibilities. Consider the logistics. The wall traverses sheer mountain ridges, remote deserts, harsh winter climates. Transporting millions of tons of stone without modern machinery would require advanced coordination, massive labor forces, sustained economic stability. Official history acknowledges immense suffering and forced labor. But alternative researchers ask, how did fragmented early states sustain such large-scale precision across thousands of kilometers? Why do some stone sections show precision that rivals later masonry? Why are certain foundation layers buried deeper than surrounding terrain levels? Is this erosion or burial? Chapter 6. The Mudflood Connection. Your audience already understands the pattern. Grand architecture appears partially buried. Windows below ground level. Streets raised over older foundations. We've seen it in Chicago, in European capitals, in St. Petersburg. So look at certain segments of the Great Wall. Why do some bases appear sunken relative to current soil grade? Official geology explains sediment accumulation. But what if large-scale deposition events occurred across Eurasia? If a prior civilization, Tartaria, fell during such an event, and later dynasties inherited its infrastructure, the wall could predate its attributed builders. Chapter 7. Political Incentives. Let's move from stone to power. When the Ming Dynasty rose to power, they needed legitimacy. Control of territory is not enough. You need historical continuity. By claiming the wall as ancestral heritage, you unify identity. You establish civilizational depth. You erase previous sovereignty. History is not only recorded, it is curated. Chapter 8. Scaling the narrative. Chicago was local. Mudflood architecture was continental. The Great Wall? Global. If a civilization once spanned Eurasia, mapped as Tartary, its infrastructure would be monumental. Rail systems, fortresses, energy grids, and border structures. A wall thousands of kilometers long would not be a defensive improvisation. It would be strategic geometry. Chapter 9. Counter-arguments. Let's remain analytical. There are valid challenges to the Tartarian hypothesis. Archaeological dating aligns many sections with Ming construction. Inscriptions link repairs to documented emperors. Defensive logic can vary by terrain. But here's the deeper issue. Dating proves renovation, not necessarily origin. Claiming maintenance is easier than admitting inheritance. Chapter 10. The psychological barrier. The Great Wall is more than stone. It's symbolic. It represents separation, sovereignty, identity. If that symbol originated under a forgotten empire, modern narratives would collapse. The wall may not just divide land. It may divide memory. Closing sequence, cinematic. Stand on the wall at sunset. Feel the wind. Look north, then south. Ask yourself, who was this truly built to stop? Who claimed it? Who benefits from its story? History is not erased in a single stroke. It is rewritten layer by layer, brick by brick. If Tartaria existed, its disappearance would not be loud. It would be administrative, cartographic, educational, and the greatest artifact of that transition might still stretch across the mountains of Asia, not as a wall of defense, but as a line between official memory and forgotten empire. Chapter 11. The orientation problem. Let's slow this down. Forget mythology. Forget empire. Look at structure. Fortification engineering follows rules that transcend culture. Defensive walls face threat direction. Arrow slits narrow outward, widen inward. Elevated platforms maximize external visibility. Yet in multiple preserved segments of the wall, certain crenellations and parapets appear oriented toward the southern interior. Historians argue terrain shifts dictated this. But terrain does not explain consistent internal reinforcement. If the north was the threat, why reinforce the south-facing side in specific stretches? Either the threat model changed, or the original purpose was different. And if the original purpose was different, then attribution becomes complicated. Chapter 12. The missing builders. Official history attributes early walls to the Qin. But here's the uncomfortable reality. There is no surviving, continuous construction record detailing the full engineering logistics of the earliest phases. No master blueprint. No comprehensive construction archives. Just fragmented references. Archaeology confirms repairs, restorations, extensions, but initial origin, less clear. And that's where historical layering becomes dangerous. Because when a dynasty inherits a structure, it does not need to build it. It only needs to maintain it. Over centuries, maintenance becomes authorship. Repair becomes origin. And inheritance becomes myth. Chapter 13. The Tartary Boundary Hypothesis. From the 16th to 18th centuries, European maps consistently label vast northern Asian territories as Tartary. Not metaphorically, not casually, repeatedly. The region stretching across Siberia and Central Asia was marked as Great Tartary. Official historians say it was a vague European catch-all term, but consistent cartographic labeling across centuries suggests administrative recognition. If Tartary represented a political entity, not merely geographic confusion, then borders would exist. And what is a border? A controlled line of separation. Now consider the wall's geographic position. It doesn't run randomly. It traces a long arc separating northern territories from imperial Chinese heartlands. What if that arc wasn't defensive, but diplomatic? A demarcation between two civilizations. One remembered, one erased. Chapter 14. The Scale Problem. The wall crosses vertical mountain ridges, remote deserts, extreme winter zones, isolated terrain requiring supply chains over vast distances. Even today, construction in those areas is logistically brutal. Now imagine maintaining workforce supply without modern transportation. Official accounts mention forced labor, hundreds of thousands of workers. But sustained multi-dynastic coordination over centuries requires something else. Administrative continuity, technological consistency, resource abundance. If Tartaria was once a centralized Eurasian power, as some alternative researchers suggest, then megastructural engineering becomes more plausible. If instead fragmented early states built disconnected segments, then later dynasties may have unified something that predated them. Not built from scratch, but inherited and rebranded. Chapter 15. Post-collapse reassignment. History shows a pattern. When empires collapse, infrastructure is absorbed. Monuments are renamed. Origins are reassigned. Consider how Rome absorbed Greek culture, how Ottoman rulers repurposed Byzantine architecture. Claiming legacy solidifies legitimacy. When the Ming Dynasty took power, they were not ethnically Han. They required historical continuity. Aligning themselves with ancient defensive achievements created civilizational depth. It created the illusion of seamless succession. If Tartary once existed as a northern superstructure, absorbing its boundary line would be politically strategic. Chapter 16. The Mud Flood Echo. You've seen this pattern before. Cities partially buried, windows below grade, foundations submerged beneath modern streets. If a large-scale geological deposition event occurred across Eurasia, whether gradual sedimentation or catastrophic flooding, infrastructure would survive unevenly. Higher elevation structures endure. Lower urban cores bury. The wall, often built along ridgelines, would survive such an event. Urban centers north of it, perhaps not. If Tartaria fell during such a disruption, the wall might be one of the few remaining above-ground relics of its administrative geometry, a scar across the continent. Chapter 17. Archaeology versus origin. Let's be intellectually honest. Archaeological dating confirms Ming-era brickwork. Inscriptions reference imperial repairs. Carbon dating aligns certain mortar samples with known dynasties. But here's the distinction. Renovation does not equal origin. If you restore a cathedral built in 900 CE during 1500 CE, radiocarbon samples from repairs reflect 1500. But foundation stones may predate recorded history. The Great Wall is not one continuous build. It is a layered structure, and layered structures hide deeper timelines. Chapter 18. Psychological conditioning. Symbols shape identity. The Great Wall is not just architecture. It is national mythology. It represents resilience, endurance, civilizational continuity. To question its origin feels like questioning cultural legitimacy, and that emotional reaction protects the narrative. But inquiry is not erasure. It is expansion. If a prior civilization contributed to its construction, that does not diminish history. It deepens it. Unless, of course, that civilization was deliberately removed from textbooks. Chapter 19. Why this matters globally. Chicago was regional. European mudflood architecture was continental. The Great Wall is planetary. It is visible from space narratives. It is one of the 7 wonders of the medieval world. It is globally recognized. If its foundational attribution is incomplete, then historical revisionism was not local. It was systemic. And if Tartaria once spanned Eurasia, then its disappearance would require synchronized narrative control across empires. Not overnight, but gradually. Cartography shifts, dynastic records reinterpreted, educational systems standardized, memory edited. Chapter 20. The Quiet Possibility. Imagine this scenario. An advanced Eurasian civilization, Tartaria, collapses due to geopolitical upheaval or environmental catastrophe. Surviving regional powers absorb remnants. Infrastructure is reassigned. Maps are redrawn. Within 2 centuries, Tartaria becomes a footnote. Within 3, it becomes a cartographic error. Within 4, it becomes conspiracy. The wall remains. Maintained, renovated, attributed, but its earliest phase, quietly reclassified, not destroyed, just renamed. Final reflection. Stand again on the wall. Look north. Look south. Ask a simple structural question. Who is it truly meant to contain? History does not always lie. Sometimes it simplifies. Sometimes it consolidates. Sometimes it inherits. The Great Wall may indeed have been expanded by Imperial China. That much is documented. But whether it began as a purely Chinese defensive project, or as the boundary of a forgotten Eurasian power, remains a question buried not in stone, but in narrative. And narratives are the most fortified structures of all.